Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a book-based interview where today we talk to author Annette Chavez Macias. Annette is an author who's known for creating stories that are centered within her Mexican American heritage, using her plots and characters to go over topics that range from following your dreams to juggling one's own heritage in today's society. Recently, written her third book, When We Were Widows, in November. Annette, thank you for being here, and I hope you had a great holiday as we enter the new year.
Hello. Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, thank you. And before we get started, if at any point you guys are interested in checking out Annette and her work, please reach out to her Instagram at author Annette and check out her website www.authorannette.com. But as we get into our first question, I just want to say again thank you. But as I've mentioned, you are an author and you do create stories that revolve around your Mexican American heritage. And this is kind of a two-parted question, but the first one is what initially made you want to become an author, and why do you create stories that do revolve around your heritage?
So I was actually one of those kids who always wanted to be an author. I was a big reader, and I attribute that to my mom, who is also a big reader, and so she is actually a big romance reader, and so we just always had books in our house, and we would regularly go to the used bookstore. We'd regularly go to the library. So I just was reading anything that I could, and I just really enjoyed, um, kind of escaping for a little bit and just falling in love with different characters. And yeah, I always loved writing, especially in school. And it was just a dream that I've always had since I can remember.
That's awesome.
And I think for me to write um, Mexican American characters and other Latinx characters, that definitely comes from not seeing my heritage represented in books that I read as a child, and even as a teenager and young adult. Um, and I think, it's kind of something where you don't realize that you're missing it until you find a book where you see yourself and you see people who look like your family, and you see different traditions and this culture that you grew up with. And it's like a light bulb goes off in your head, like, yes, this is what I've been missing. And so when I became an author, a published author, I was, I did make it, you know, a goal of mine to, to continue to promote positive representation of Mexican American people and families in everything that I write.
That's awesome. I definitely can relate to what you were saying where you don't realize what you're missing until you pick up a piece of work that does talk about your heritage and you realize, wait a minute, like this feels so home. For me, I'm Fiji Indian, but when I grew up, it's a little bit weird thing where I am Indian, but it's a different side of Indian culture where we're technically my family's from Fiji, but our ancestors are from India. And it's funny because when I talk to Indian people, they don't even know that there's Indian people in Fiji, but that's where my family came from. And growing up here in America, especially, I'm a first generation American, and it's definitely weird because there's such a big culture clash where you come to America and you see so many other things, and for a second you kind of not like forget, but I guess like my own personal culture from me growing up, it kind of took a little bit of a back seat because I was just so immersed in what was around me when I went to school, when I met people from different backgrounds. But one thing that really clicked with me when you said that is that when I watch Bollywood movies, which are like really old, like Indian movies from the 90s, I always feel that. Or when I listen to Bollywood music or like Indian music, when I hear their voices and I hear the language, or I see a scene from a movie that just really represents the culture, I do feel that weird, and it's not weird, but like I do feel that warmth in my heart where I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this feels like home. And I totally understand what you're saying there. And when it comes to writing these stories, what is your writing process like? And when it comes to creating these stories, are these stories that you always had in your mind where you were like, you know what, um there's kind of a void in literature where they're not really talking about these stories. I want to talk about these specific stories. Or is it more like, okay, I want to talk about positive representation of my heritage. How could I possibly start going around that route? And then from there, you kind of brainstorm into creating the stories that you have created already, if that makes sense.
Um, I actually had the stories um, first.
Mm.
Um, so, so although I had always wanted to become an author and be a writer, life happens, and there's detours that come, and so I actually started working as a newspaper reporter and an editor, and then I went into corporate healthcare writing. And it wasn't until I was going to turn 40 that I kind of had this, you know, revelation as to why haven't I written a book. Um, and that actually happened because I had a story in my head. And, I talked about how, you don't know what you're missing until you see it, until you find it. And remember I had read a book. It was called Dirty Girls Social Club by Elisa Valdez Rodriguez. And that was the first book I read where all of the main characters, it's about 5 women, friends from college, all of the women were Latina. But they represented different cultures. It wasn't just Mexican American. And so that book was really the, I think, inspiration I needed, because I had a story in my head about 4 Mexican American cousins and what happens to them over the course of one year, all the different, drama that happens. And so I had this book in my head, but I didn't know how to be an author. I didn't even, know how many words it was going to take for me to finish this book. I just had ideas in my head. And so luckily I had kept in contact with a friend from college on Facebook, and she was a published author. And so I reached out to her and I asked her advice, how do I do this? And so she gave me all kinds of wonderful tips. And one of them was to join a writing group, a local writing chapter. And so I did. And so the more I started to become a part of this writing community, then that was giving me I guess, again, the inspiration that, I had a story to tell, and I didn't see this type of story in other books yet. And so I knew there was a space to fill in the writing community. But it just took me a long time, I think, to have the confidence that, that I could write this story, first of all, and that somebody would want to read it, besides my sister. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, my first contract was actually in romance. And that was because my friend was a romance author, and the writing group that I joined was for romance writers. And so I actually got my first contract for a short story with a romance publisher. And even when I was like finished signing the contract, or I was talking about it with my friend, she had said to me, "So are your characters going to be Latina?" And it hadn't even like occurred to me, mm-hmm. Something that, oh yeah, you're right, I could like that, because that's not what I had read.
Right.
And so once I realized that I could have this platform then yes, I definitely decided, my characters, all of my stories are going to center around um, Latina, Mexican American uh, characters and families. And so I think when I did finally publish my first women's fiction book, which was Big Chicas Don't Cry, that was the original story that I had had in my head.
Mhm.
It was about these four Mexican American cousins and their relationship with each other and with their great grandmother. And it was a very personal story, although it was fictional. It was a very personal story, but I think because it was so personal and I knew I wanted to tell it is really what helped me take that leap
Yeah.
to be an author and follow that dream.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely want to say great. Like it's really, especially as someone like me, like I just finished graduate school a couple years ago, and me and my friends started BookBase. It's sometimes really exciting, and it feels really close to heart when we hear about stories of people that are always trying to not only find themselves, but when they actually decide to take that step into wanting to go from a lifestyle that they maybe were comfortable or knew at one point to decide to delve into something like wanting to be an author. And your story is definitely a story that we've heard before, where it starts off with somebody that loved writing, loved reading, but of course, like as you grow up, you go into the corporate world, you just have to get a job, you work in whatever field you can, and then that passion of wanting to be an author always somehow slips through the cracks and kind of comes back to you. And then there's a milestone moment where you kind of take that step and saying, you know what, I'm just gonna go for it. And I think that's beautiful, because I think there's a lot of great things that can happen in this world, and there's a lot of great people that can do great things. But I think what really comes to core is having that confidence to not only say I can do it, but that other people will also find it rewarding as I find it rewarding. And I'm just curious about this because this actually hit me right now. In your opinion, when it comes to becoming an author or a writer, how much of it do you think is personal confidence and conviction, like, hey, I need to do this and I can do this? And how much of it do you think is maybe like the difficulty comes from the industry, like, oh my gosh, like it's hard to get a contract, it's hard to find that publisher or an editor?
I definitely think 50% is personal um, confidence
Mm-hmm.
or, passion. And then 50% is luck.
Mm, got it.
Because I know there are so many talented writers out there who just have not had luck with the right book, the right agent, the right publisher. And I think for me, when I was working on Big Chicas Don't Cry, I submitted all over the place and I got rejections all over the place. And some rejections were, like that form letter where, they don't really tell you anything. They just say, we can't offer you representation. But then other rejections came back as, well, I can't relate to your story. I can't relate to your characters.
Mm,
And so looking back now, I mean, obviously when it was happening, I was devastated.
right.
But looking back now, I can see it was because it wasn't the right agent. It wasn't the right editor for this book. And it took me 11, 12 years until I found the right agent and I found the right publisher to finally get Big Chicas Don't Cry published. So it definitely is like 50-50.
No, yeah, I think that's really important for people to know, because I think when it comes to writing, especially writing, I feel like a lot of people kind of push themselves down before they even get started. Where, I think a lot of people sometimes have very beautiful stories that I think should be shared and should be promoted. But I think a lot of people think the first question is, oh, who's gonna like it? And I think that's kind of it's not that it's a negative question, but I kind of feel like you're taking away from writing when you ask questions like that, because instead of asking, will anybody like it, you should ask yourself, do you like it? And I've heard a lot of people tell me, because we've been interviewing a lot of authors, like that's like the number one advice that I think is really consistent so far, which is people always say, if you have a story to share, I think like, if you have a story and you feel like it's fun, maybe that's a story worth sharing. And I think it's a really easy answer to a very maybe complicated question whether or not this is worth pursuing. And I get it, like, life comes in the way, and I know like a lot of people sometimes struggle with balancing their, work schedules with passions and then social life, family matters. So it totally makes sense. But I think that 50-50 breakdown that you just said is really important, because for people that are willing to take that chance and everything ends up working out to allow that scheduling for them to be able to do that, I think it's worthwhile, because if it's a 50-50, at least cover half the base, which is like, hey, let me write the story, let me do what I can. And then the whole other aspect of trying to find people that can relate to the story and help you promote it, like you're saying, it's luck, but luck's out of your control. Like, who cares about that at that point? At least you did what you can control. And I think that's really important for people to know. Going on to our next question. So, your recent novel, When We Were Widows, revolves around characters Anna and Jessica, who grieve over the passing of their husbands. Where was the inspiration for this story specifically? And was this a struggle that you saw in real life with other people? Or was this more of a creative endeavor that addresses another aspect of your heritage?
Um, so this book is, yeah, so Anna is the mother of Jessica. And then another character in the book is Mama Melda, who is Jessica's grandmother. And all three of them are widows.
Hmm.
And so they become widows, and the book is more about not just the grief that they have to learn how to live with, but also using that grief to heal their relationship with each other. Because all three of them have been keeping secrets. And so it's really about mothers and daughters.
Hmm.
And for me, I'm not a widow, but my grandmother became a widow when she was in her 30s. Sorry, my great grandmother became a widow when she was in her 30s. My grandmother became a widow when she was in her 80s, and my mother became a widow when she was in her 70s. And so I think that was definitely the inspiration behind this book. They weren't widows at the same time, obviously, but I could see how that experience shaped and continues to shape, their relationships with other people, especially my great grandmother, because she was such a young widow when she had 13 children. Um, it was up to her to, keep the family together and just, survive day to day. And I'm sure that affected how she was a mother to those children and to my grandmother. And so I just kind of wanted to explore those themes, um, and also explore themes of grief. All of my books, but my women's fiction books, have grief as an underlying theme. And especially for me, it does kind of connect to my culture, because especially for the women in Mexican culture specifically,
Mm-hmm.
um, the women of the family hold the family together, and they're the ones who have to be strong, and they are the ones who can't show emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes,
Right.
they have to be strong because they're going to take care of the family.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think that's something that definitely comes up in all of my books.
Mm-hmm.
And not, and so, and When We Were Widows is actually, one of the books that handles this from different perspectives, from different generational perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
because you have Mama Melda, who's in her 70s, and then who grew up in a different time.
Right.
You he wasn't um, able to show that kind of affection or emotion um, because she had become a single mother. And so all the way to now Jessica, who's in her 30s, and this modern, independent, career-driven woman
Mm-hmm.
who now is a widow, a young widow with no children. And it's kind of, for her, it's more of, because she doesn't have children, so she doesn't have to be strong for anybody. So hers is more of, I need to be strong in my work
Mm.
because I can't let people at work see that this is going to affect my life.
Right.
And she was constantly trying to prove herself to outsiders, to strangers. And so that this book kind of explores how the three women um, deal with grief in their own ways, but at the same time, they use that grief to connect to each other.
Right, absolutely. I think your story, especially for When We Were Widows, I think a really cool aspect about your stories is, it's crazy how your stories do revolve around Mexican American culture or heritage, but it's able to be translated to other cultures because I'm not a part of that heritage or that culture, but I can see the underlining similarities, like what you were just saying about how women run the household in your heritage. It's the same way with us, and it's funny because my grandmother is 4'10". She's so short, but everybody bows to her, and there's a reason why, because she's been that consistent rock for that family. Where no matter what happens, usually my grandpa, he's very quick as a fuse. Like if you get him upset, he's emotional. He's upset. Like he is gone. Like he doesn't want to listen to reason. He'll be upset right then and there. And I've seen many moments where my grandma will go up to him and be like, cut it out, like this, like you need to stop, you need to lock in, I need you to go make something, or I need you to go do something, you need to hold it down. And I think that's amazing because I think there are many examples, I think across all heritages, where there's so many powerful women that deal with so many complications or so many problems, especially because of society today, and how a lot of struggles do come just because a lot of women just are women. And it's sometimes like it comes at a consequence where people think, like, especially like living in a patriarchal society where there's so many assumptions and there's so many taboos and weird things about how we treat women. And on top of that, you add a lot of culture stereotypes and even culture inside, like there could be internal toxicity, or even forms of women have to deal with so many problems in or outside their heritage. But then you still see that rock coming through, where you do see people like your great grandmother, my grandmother, that come in and they are able to hold it together. And I think another thing that I love about When We Were Widows is that you're addressing something which is grief over the passing of their loved ones. And in my culture, I've always seen it as a weird taboo thing where if you do see a widow, the first thing isn't, hey, let's console this person. It's more of like, don't really talk about it because you don't want to deal with the possible sensitivity of the
Right.
situation. And I kind of think that's a weird way to look at it because it's such a natural thing where if you are in a relationship and you do stay with that person for such a long time, there is that chance, of course, where, maybe something can happen where one may end up passing before the other. And I have seen examples where somebody's like, oh yeah, that person's spouse passed away, like let's go over here. And I think your book kind of goes the other way where you're kind of looking at it in a spotlight. And it's not even just because you're trying to like say like it's a natural thing, but the relationships that you have with Anna, Yeska, and even Yeska's great grandmother, where you have these three generations of women dealing with the same problem at different times. There's a lot of underlining similarities and importance that goes behind wanting to talk about this. And I just think that's really great because I think if you're doing this for your own heritage, I think this might even inspire other people of other cultures and backgrounds to say, hey, you know what? That's a great point. Like I think this should also be explored in my personal context, and I think that's great. um Going on to the next question. Your bio on Goodreads actually mentions that you also write love stories under your pen name Sabrina Sol, and I wanted to ask, like, what's the difference between writing a story like When We Were Widows or Big Chicas Don't Cry, and writing a love story that may follow a different structure? And personally, I was just curious, what's easier for you to write? So if depending on your writing process, of course, I know that you said that Big Chicas Don't Lie was a story that was always in your head, but between writing like a brand new love story versus writing another story that's about your heritage, what kind of comes easier to you, and just talking about the difference between the two?
So for romance, there's really, two main rules of romance. One of which is there has to be a central love story. So the book is about the love story. And then the second is that the book needs to end on a happily ever after or a happy for now. So, for example, Romeo and Juliet is not a love story because they don't end up together. Um, so, as I mentioned, I got my start in romance. And so when I was trying to, when I was getting ready to submit for Big Chicas Don't Cry, I knew that Big Chicas Don't Cry, a little bit of spoilers, was not going to be a romance. Um, because of the happily ever after requirement. And so I knew that I had readers who might follow me over to my women's fiction. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be clear to them that they were not going to get romance central love story. And so because women's fiction is about the main character's journey to discovering something about herself and this growth. So at the beginning of the book, she's one way, and by the end of the book, she's changed. Right. Of things that she's learned along the way. And I think because, like I mentioned, I got started in romance, my women's fiction book does have romance subplot. Sorry. But it is not the central part of the story. Mm. If I took out those romance subplots, there would still be a story there. And so, for me, it's not that so much one genre is easier to write than the other. A different type of focus for these stories. And, okay, so women's fiction, again, is, there could be romance in women's fiction, but it's not the main part of the story. And so, for me, I like writing both the genres. I plan to always continue writing both, because, romance is in my roots. That's what I grew up on, and so I don't think I could not write romance or not insert romance into my women's fiction.
Right.
And it's not so much that one is easier than the other. It's just a different, I almost want to say, just have to, it's a different type of mood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, for women's fiction, it is more about, I think the focus is on the main character, yes, but at the same time, you can develop all of these side characters who help her on her journey. Whereas for romance, you just really need to focus on for me, I write, male, female. So I just have to focus on the couple.
Right.
And the side characters are kind of, they're thrown in there, just so they're not just talking to each other. But even in my romance books, family is a big theme. Food is a big theme. And that's just because that's who I am, and that's how I like to show my heritage on the page.
Right.
Through these, through food, through tradition. I have some Spanish in there, but it's definitely, for me, it's more about what story do I want to tell at that moment? What story do I feel like telling? And sometimes it's going to be romance, and sometimes it may be women's fiction. And it also, depends too as what do I have a contract for. And so right now I have contracts for women's fiction. So that's what I've been focusing on in the past year.
That's awesome. I think it's really interesting, and I think it's really cool actually, how your experience when you first started writing as a romance author kind of led to you being able to create really cool subplots for your women's fiction novels. And I think that also kind of gives an important lesson where it's like your previous skill sets, no matter if it's in writing or whatever, can still be brought into your passion in writing now if you choose to pursue it. I think there's a lot of people where if they did start writing and say it was like, for example, fan fiction, and it was just them creating a story about their favorite characters, I think a lot of people would be like, or ask the question, how do I translate, what I'm doing right here? Is there anything relevant to what I'm doing for fun into another future passion that I want to take more seriously? And I think that's really great how, when you start writing, you didn't need to start writing women's fiction to end up creating Big Chicas Don't Lie. You were just writing, and then from there, you not only gained your skill set in writing, and not only did you get a flavor for romance, and you got your deep roots, settled in that genre, but then when it came to women's fiction, you did want to create a story that did, promote a different side of your writing style. I think it's still cool how you were still able to kind of wheel in your romance, and even though the romance served a different purpose, I'm pretty sure like overall it kind of added another layer to the plot line, added another layer to the characterization. And I think that's where it really creates an immersive experience. When somebody decides to read one of your books, they'll see that layer, and I think that's awesome. I think in the future, like, I think it'll be really cool to see how, other experiences that you gain as an author kind of relates to your stories as well. And this is actually leading into my next question. And you kind of already hinted at it, but I was gonna ask not only what's in the future for you as an author, but would you ever be willing to experiment with other genres besides romance and kind of like wheel that into your women's fiction? Like, for example, and I don't know if you've ever thought about this, I know that a really big way that people tend to share stories, and this is kind of going what you just mentioned lightly, for Romeo and Juliet, it's a tragedy. And I do know that when it comes to not only films, but even like other forms of media like literature, tragedies have always been one of those common forms of writing that kind of allows people to use the sadness to kind of convey a message, and I do think that when it comes to not only women's fiction, but especially stories that deal with, heritage, I think that's also a possibility where like sometimes a sad story can kind of convey a lesson or maybe even a message that you're trying to promote. And I was just wondering, like, would you ever be willing to kind of go outside the happy for now, or kind of go beyond the romance sublayer? Or yeah, I was just wondering, like, have you ever thought about other forms of experimentation for these other genres, or do you kind of feel confident that you do want to keep it to, the way that you have been going around things?
I think it's more about writing books that I want to read.
Mm.
So I am not a person who likes to read sad books, or, tragic books.
Mhm.
Um, and same with TV shows. Like I don't like watching. I'm a true crime fan,
Yeah.
but I don't like watching documentaries or like Daylight episodes about people who are still missing. Because for me, I need that happy ending, even if that happy is them being found.
Right.
So I don't like the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and again, I think that goes back to my romance roots, is I need some type of closure.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, I'm really focused on my women's fiction, and romance. So I don't know if I would have time to, start writing in a different genre. But if I would, it probably would be some type of like thriller or mystery, because that's what I like to read also, and what I like to watch on TV. So I think that's the main thing, is that anybody who's thinking about writing a book or even if you've already published, but you're thinking about writing a new book, don't write something that just because you think it's going to sell or just because you think it's popular right now, that genre. Um, you need to write what you like to read.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's the only way that your story is going to be authentic and that's going to be interesting to others, because your readers are very smart and readers can tell, if you're not being authentic in a book.
Right.
You're just putting out a book just to put out a book. So for me right now, because uh, this is what I love to read and what I love romance rom-coms on TVs, that's probably what I'm going to stick with. And so for what's next for me, I actually have a new book coming out next year, next September. It's another women's fiction. It's called Everything She Never Knew. And it's about a woman whose husband leaves her for her best friend. And so it's really a story. What I've been saying is, yes, it's a marriage breakup. It's about a marriage breakup. I'm sorry, the breakup of a marriage, but it's also about the breakup of a friendship. And so that's, like I said, that's coming out in September. I'm just doing edits right now. But yeah, so I'm excited about this next book.
That's exciting. Yeah, that plot line, oh my gosh. If that happened to me, oh, it would be a different ending. Like, it would definitely be a tragedy. Like, I don't know. I think it's really cool how, again, another great thing that you just talked about was you don't want to write something you wouldn't read. And I think this has to go with a lot of forms of creativity, because this is something that I've also heard that's really common in the music industry. There's a lot of people that are really big fans of music, and you can tell in their work when they do create something that does kind of hold a deeper level of emotion or just a deeper level in the way that they promote their art. And then you do know that there's people that do kind of quote unquote sell out and they just write music because they get a check at the end of the day. And you can totally tell the difference. And there's nothing bad about it. Like, of course, if you're, if that's how that person wants to create their music or if that's how they want to go about things, that's great. But I think when it comes to especially something like writing, if you are gonna write something, like, I kind of think it's cool to just say, like, don't kid yourself. Like, if you like something and you enjoy reading it, you should go for it. And I'm with you. I don't know, I'm kind of split, because as much as I love closure, because when I watch movies, I love watching movies, and there are movies that I've seen that don't give closure. It's a tragedy, and they make it like that on purpose. But they totally make it to seem like it's going to be a really great happy ending, and then the end of it just happens, and you're just in the theater like, did someone just hurt me right now? Like, I feel so lost. I feel so betrayed. Like, how could you do that? Like, I bought a movie ticket to watch this, and this is how you do things. And I think it's really funny because, it's the same thing with me where, I'll watch shows like Unsolved Mysteries. And of course, the whole show is about the unsolved mystery portion. And now I'm all paranoid, looking around the house like, hey, is anybody missing? Is everybody good? So I'm with you. And I think that's like the really great part about creating stories that kind of have that safety. And I think it's cool that your writing style kind of holds that safety where people can feel comfortable knowing that while the stories are going to be different, and maybe the tempo even might be different, there's something that's going to be warm at the end of it. And I think there's a lot of people that wouldn't. I know I would. Like, I definitely would totally enjoy, reading your book. And even if it gets really, intense or something, it'd be nice knowing, like, in the back of your head, like, okay, well, I really hope this does work out. And then you get to the end of the book and say, oh, wow, okay, like, there is a happy ending in quote unquote for whatever story that may be that you're writing. But again, thank you. And I know we're kind of approaching the last question, and this is my favorite question to ask because this kind of essential to BookBase as a startup. So as we've talked to you about before, BookBase is an app on the phone that kind of helps replicate in-person book club chats onto a virtual scale. So it's allowing people to not only show off their reading style, like by adding books on their profile to show people like, hey, I like these types of books, but it also allows people to meet others and kind of communicate over literature. And I wanted to ask you, you kind of mentioned this in the beginning where you talked about you going to the library with your family, but I just wanted to ask, what do you think is important about socializing around books, and what is your experience with talking to others around books, whether you were growing up or recently? I don't know if you're part of a book club, but yeah, I was just curious.
I think book communities are so important, especially when you're looking for diverse books, because it does still seem, even in 2025, that diverse authors are um, not given the same attention,
Mhm.
publicity, or marketing as um, non-diverse authors. And so really they get their peers by word of mouth. And so especially, I mean, I've experienced that ever since, with all of my books. It's usually because somebody read the book, loved it, and then went ahead and shared it with their moms, with their aunts, with their cousins, and with their friends. And so I definitely think book communities are so important, and they're a safe space
Yeah.
for readers. And there's something about community that not just it turns into. It's not just about books.
Mhm.
It's about friendship and supporting one another, while getting closer over something that everyone loves. Um, you find that common ground in the book community, and so I definitely believe that that's so important. And social media has really helped to grow these book communities. Um, yes, there's still some, little pockets of toxicity and, um, people who use books as more of a status symbol, or, to get used to get clout. But you just kind of have to dismiss that,
Right.
not focus on that, and instead focus on the people who are there for the right reasons. And they just want to talk about books that they love.
Yeah.
And I think even when I was growing up, there's no social media. But I do remember, when there was a book that I loved or my friends loved, that book would get passed around, the entire friend group, one copy, and we would all take turns reading it. And I think that's what books are today. Um, so yeah, I love these communities. I support them. I'm thrilled whenever a book club chooses one of my books to read, and if they reach out and say, "Will you come talk to us?" The answer is always going to be yes, because I just think that's just so important.
Wow, that's amazing. And I thank you again for your answer. And I think it's really cool how, even though we live in a time with all this technology, and especially with like all the social media and like, especially like all the noise, I just feel like sometimes that we have just because of all the advancements that we have today, there are simpler times where like, you go back like, 30, 40 years. And, my mom grew up in a time where there was no social media either. And she would always tell me about how special things felt when not everything was connected all the time. And like, especially for today, a great example, you go to a concert. I know that if you went to a concert back in the day, like say for example the 70s or 80s, it doesn't even matter, like you go to a concert, nobody would have a phone out because number one, phones weren't even that big of a thing, and number two, everybody was living in the moment. And now we're living in a time where so many people are more obsessed with capturing the moment than enjoying it. And I think book clubs really kind of go the other way, where there's not really anything to capture. Like, yeah, of course, the memento of, talking to somebody about something that you're really enjoying at the moment is amazing. But I really enjoy how, even though we're in a time where there's so much technology and there's so many other ways that you can explore things, people still go back to literature and they still want to talk about books. And I think that kind of shows that there's something really core about expressing yourself through something as quote unquote old school, like writing a book, compared to maybe doing something that's more modern that other people would do. You know, something that's really great is just sitting down, crafting a story, and sharing that story with other people to talk about. I think will always be there, no matter how, you know, crazy society gets in terms of like all the advancements we make and everything. And I think that's really warm as well, like a warm feeling that whenever you do, you know, meet somebody that says like, hey, I read this book, I really like it, and you kind of, you know, you also had a very strong connection to that same book. I think that connection, while it may be more rare now because it may be harder to find people, like you were saying, it is really important. And I think it's really great that, you know, especially as BookBase, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect people that otherwise wouldn't be able to connect over literature. And I think that it's really great that you're willing to even be so active in that and be a part of that with, especially when somebody chooses to read your book. I think it's amazing that you're an author that's willing to meet people that talk about your book, because usually I feel like it may be the other way around where sometimes, you know, authors are so busy or maybe they don't really think about it like that. It's the readers that are like, can you please join me, you know, can you please come. And sometimes you get a no, and but for you it's the other way around where you're active about it and you really want to be a part of that conversation. And I think that's amazing. And I think that's just a great way to kind of lead towards the ending of the interview. But I just want to say again, thank you so much, Annette, for joining me and talking to us not only about your books and your story, but just talking to us about just the power of heritage and writing about something that really, you know, hits home. So thank you so much. And I also want to say again that if anybody is listening to this and watching this and are interested in following Annette's journey, please follow Annette on Instagram at author Annette. And also, please check out her website at authorannette.com. But Annette, I just want to say again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. And I think what you and your team is doing is just so amazing. So good luck to you all.